The wind came down from the Bitterroot Mountains with nothing to slow it. It crossed 20 miles of empty grass, gathered dust from the frozen ground, and struck Elias Mercer's ranch hard enough to make the roof boards groan. By sunrise, the water troughs wore skins of ice. The cattle stood with their backs to the north, heads lowered, waiting for the cold to pass. Elias knew it would not pass soon. Winter had arrived early in Montana territory, and the land had begun its yearly work of testing everything that lived upon it. Fence posts leaned beneath the wind. Leather cracked. Horses lost weight. A careless man could freeze within sight of his own chimney. Elias had survived 12 winters on the Broken Spur Ranch by respecting what the land could do. He checked the cattle before he fed himself. He kept 2 lanterns filled, 3 cords of wood stacked beneath the porch roof, and enough flour to last until spring. He depended on no one. That was how he preferred it. His nearest neighbor lived 7 miles south. The town of Red Hollow lay another 11 miles beyond that, a scattering of wooden buildings pressed against a muddy road. Elias went there only when his supplies forced him. On the first Monday of November, he harnessed his bay gelding to the wagon and started before daylight. The sky was the color of old iron. Snow had not yet begun, but Elias could smell it gathering beyond the mountains. He reached Red Hollow shortly after noon. The town was busier than usual. 2 freight wagons stood outside the mercantile. Ranch hands crowded the saloon porch, stamping warmth into their boots. Near the stage depot, 3 riders moved slowly along the street. They were not traveling. They were searching. Elias noticed the way they studied faces. One man looked beneath the awning of the dressmaker's shop. Another entered the hotel and came back out, almost at once. The third remained mounted, one hand resting near the revolver at his hip. Elias watched them for a moment, then went inside the mercantile. He purchased coffee, salt, lamp oil, nails, and a sack of dried beans. Mr. Weller wrapped the smaller goods in brown paper while complaining about the weather. Elias listened without answering. When he returned to the street, the 3 riders had separated. One waited beside the depot. Another questioned the blacksmith. The third had ridden toward the eastern road. Elias loaded his supplies into the wagon. He had just placed the flour beneath the seat when a woman stepped from the narrow space between the mercantile and the feed store. She wore a dark traveling coat that was too thin for the season. Mud stained the bottom of her skirt. Loose strands of brown hair clung to her cheeks, and one sleeve had been torn near the shoulder. She came close enough that Elias could hear her breathing. "Please pretend you know me," she whispered. Elias looked past her. The mounted man beside the depot had turned in their direction. Elias did not ask who she was. He did not ask what she had done. He lifted the wagon blanket and spoke loudly enough to carry across the street. "There you are, Clara. I told you not to wander off." The woman stared at him, only for an instant. Then she lowered her eyes. "I am sorry." Elias took her small case from her hand and placed it behind the seat. "You can explain it to your aunt when we get home." The man near the depot nudged his horse forward. Elias helped the woman into the wagon, climbed beside her, and gathered the reins. The rider blocked their path before they had gone 10 feet. He was broad through the chest, with a pale scar running from his ear to his jaw. His coat was expensive, but dust covered the shoulders. He smiled without warmth. Afternoon. Elias waited. The man looked at the woman. "You know this lady?" Elias kept his voice flat. "She is my cousin." The woman's hands tightened beneath the wagon blanket. "Name?" Elias looked at the rider until the man's smile weakened. "You always question another man's family in the street." "I am looking for someone." "Then keep looking." The rider studied Elias's face. Something in it must have told him that the conversation would go no further. He moved his horse aside. Elias drove past without hurrying. The woman did not look back until they had crossed the bridge west of town. When she finally turned, the three riders were small figures against the buildings. Elias kept the gelding at a steady pace. The first flakes of snow appeared before they reached the open range. They traveled for nearly a mile in silence. "My name is not Clara," the woman said. "I know. It is Lena Harrow." Elias glanced at her torn sleeve. "That may not be true either." "It is." He nodded once. The snow thickened. It gathered in the folds of the blanket and melted against their boots. "Who are they?" he asked. Lena looked toward the empty hills. "Men who believe I have something that belongs to them." "Do you?" "No." Elias waited. She swallowed. "I have something that proves what they took from others." That was all she offered. Elias did not press her. The Broken Spur appeared near dusk, its house and barn dark against the whitening ground. Smoke rose from the stone chimney, thin and straight, before the wind tore it apart. Lena looked at the buildings as though trying to decide whether they promised safety or another kind of trap. Elias stopped the wagon beside the porch. "You can stay tonight," he said. "The eastern stage will pass through Red Hollow in 3 days, if the road stays open." She climbed down carefully. "And if it does not, we will discuss that when it happens." Inside, the house smelled of cold ashes, coffee grounds, and saddle leather. The main room held a table, 4 chairs, an iron stove, and shelves built from rough pine. A faded blue shawl hung on a peg near the bedroom door. Lena noticed it. Elias removed the shawl and placed it inside a chest. He lit 2 lamps. "There is a room at the end of the hall," he said. "The latch works. Water is in the pitcher. I will sleep out here." Lena stood near the stove, still wearing her coat. "You do not know anything about me." "No. I could steal from you. You could try." Her eyes moved toward the rifle above the mantel. Elias added 2 pieces of wood to the stove. "At first light, I will ride the south pasture. You can leave if you choose. The road to town follows the fence east." She took a slow breath. "And if those men are waiting? That is your concern." The words were hard, but Elias placed a plate of beans and salt pork on the table before stepping outside to tend the horse. When he returned, the plate was empty. The bedroom door was closed. A chair had been wedged beneath the handle from the inside. During the night, the snow became a storm. Wind pressed against the house from every direction. Powder slipped through cracks around the windows and gathered along the floor. Elias woke twice to feed the stove. Each time, he saw lamplight beneath Lena's door. At dawn, the road had disappeared. Snow reached the porch steps. The fence was visible only as a line of white humps stretching into the distance. Elias saddled his roan mare. Lena came from the hallway while he pulled on his gloves. She had tied her hair back, and the torn sleeve of her dress had been fastened with 3 small pins. "You cannot ride in this." "I can. You cannot see the trail. I know where it is." She looked through the window. "How long will the storm last?" "Maybe a day, maybe 4. "What should I do?" Elias had not expected the question. He looked around the room. Dust lay across the shelves. A basket of unmended shirts sat beneath the table. Near the stove, an empty flour crock waited to be filled from the sack outside. "Keep the fire alive." Lena nodded. When Elias returned near sunset, ice coated his coat and hat. His hands had gone numb inside his gloves. He found the porch swept clean and a lantern burning beside the door. The smell of bread met him before he entered. Lena had made a small loaf in the iron oven. It was dense and slightly burned along one edge, but it was warm. She placed it on the table without comment. Elias removed his wet coat. "You found the yeast. It was behind the salt." He broke the loaf in half and gave her the larger piece. That became the beginning of their arrangement. The storm lasted 5 days. On the second morning, Lena found the basket of torn shirts. By evening, 2 had been mended. Her stitches were small and straight. On the third day, Elias carried an armful of wood inside and discovered that she had cleaned years of soot from the glass lamp chimneys. On the fourth, she asked where he kept the account books. Elias looked up from sharpening a skinning knife. "Why? You have 3 receipts nailed beside the door. 1 is overdue. It can wait. The interest will not." He pointed toward a drawer. Lena spent the afternoon at the table, arranging loose papers into careful stacks. She worked slowly, lips moving as she added columns in her head. That evening, she placed a page beside Elias's plate. "Your feed merchant charged you twice for the September delivery." Elias studied the figures. "You are certain?" "Yes." He looked at her hands. They were not the hands of someone raised to hard labor. The skin was soft, though one knuckle bore a recent bruise. "You kept accounts before." Lena lowered her gaze. "For a freight company." "The men in town?" She folded the dishcloth. "I would rather not speak about them yet." Elias slipped the page into his pocket. He did not ask again. When the storm passed, the road remained blocked. Drifts filled the low ground between the ranch and Red Hollow. The stage did not come. No rider appeared along the eastern fence. Lena stayed. At first, she spoke each morning as though the day might be her last at the Broken Spur. "I can leave once the road clears." Elias would nod. "I will repay you for the food." He would point toward another task. "There are potatoes in the cellar." Or, "The chicken house needs straw." Or, "Write a letter to the feed merchant." By the second week, she stopped mentioning the stage. A quiet rhythm formed between them. Elias rose before daylight and found coffee waiting on the stove. Lena learned that he took it black and that he would forget breakfast unless bread was placed directly in his path. He learned that she saved the heel of each loaf for the barn cat. He learned that sudden noises made her turn sharply toward the door. He learned that she checked the road from the upstairs window before carrying water from the pump. Neither of them spoke about these things. In the evenings, Elias repaired harness at one end of the table, while Lena copied his ranch accounts at the other. The house changed around them. Curtains that had remained closed for years were washed and rehung. The shelves lost their dust. A cracked crock was bound with wire and returned to use. One afternoon, Elias found his winter gloves beside the stove. The split seam along the thumb had been repaired. The next morning, Lena discovered that the broken clasp on her traveling case had been replaced with a new piece of brass. No thanks passed between them. None was needed. December settled over the range. The cold became steady and merciless. At night, the timber in the walls snapped like distant gunfire. Wolves called from the hills, and the cattle crowded close to the windbreak. Elias spent longer hours outside. Lena began meeting him at the barn with a lantern. She did not carry it because he needed help finding his way. She carried it because the light made the final 100 yards feel shorter. One evening, Elias arrived with blood on his sleeve. Lena set the lantern down. "What happened?" "Cow caught me against the fence." "Sit." "It is nothing." "Sit." Her voice was quiet, but Elias obeyed. Inside, she cut the sleeve from his shirt and washed the scrape along his upper arm. The wound was shallow. Her hands remained steady until hoofbeats sounded on the frozen road. The cloth fell from her fingers. Elias crossed to the window. A lone rider passed the ranch without slowing. Lena stood behind him, pale and still. "He is gone," Elias said. She nodded. Her hands shook when she picked up the cloth. Elias did not turn from the window until her breathing became even again. A week before Christmas, one of the heifers went into labor too early. Elias found her lying in the straw, exhausted and frightened. He sent Lena back to the house, but she returned wearing his old coat over her dress. "What do you need?" "A lamp." She held it while Elias worked. The calf came weak and silent. Elias cleared its mouth and rubbed its body with burlap. Lena knelt in the straw, heedless of the cold and dirt, and helped until the animal finally drew a thin breath. They stayed in the barn for more than an hour. When the calf managed to stand, Lena smiled. It was the first time Elias had seen her do so without caution. The smile changed her face. For a moment, she looked younger and less tired. Elias looked away before she noticed him watching. On Christmas morning, the sky cleared. Sunlight spread across the snow so brightly that the whole valley seemed made of glass. Lena placed a small package beside Elias's coffee cup. Inside was a red wool scarf. The old one was nearly worn through, she said. Elias ran the cloth between his fingers. He had not received a Christmas gift in 6 years. From beneath the table, he brought out a narrow wooden box. He had carved it during the evenings after Lena went to bed. The lid bore the shape of a meadowlark. Lena opened it carefully. "It is for your papers," he said. She touched the carved bird. "My mother used to call me that." Elias waited, but she said nothing more. She carried the box to her room. Later, when she went outside for water, Elias noticed that the faded blue shawl was no longer hidden in the chest. He had placed it back on the peg near the door. Lena touched it when she came inside. "Your wife's? My sister's." She looked at him. Elias sat beside the stove. "Rose came here after her husband left her. People in town had plenty to say about it. I listened to them more than I listened to her." Lena lowered herself into the chair across from him. "She wanted to stay?" she asked once. The stove clicked as it cooled. "I told her she should return home and settle things properly." "What happened?" "Her husband took her east. She wrote twice. Then the letters stopped." Elias stared at the fire. "I never found out where they went." Lena's fingers closed around the edge of the shawl. "I am sorry." Elias nodded. That was the most either of them had said about the past. By January, the ranch no longer felt like a place Lena had borrowed. Her boots stood beside Elias's at the door. Her hairbrush rested near the wash basin. A jar of dried flowers appeared on the windowsill, brittle stems gathered from beneath the snow near the barn wall. Then the riders came. There were 4 this time. The scarred man from Red Hollow led them. Beside him rode Deputy Harlan Say, his tin badge visible against his black coat. Elias saw them from the north pasture. He returned to the house at a gallop. Lena was standing at the kitchen table when he entered. One look at his face was enough. "How many?" "4. She closed her account book. "I will go out the back." "They have circled the house." Lena's face lost its color. Elias removed his rifle from above the mantel, checked the chamber, and leaned it beside the door. "I am not starting a gunfight," he said, "but I will not let them drag you from this house. You do not know what they will claim. Then tell me before they do." Hooves stopped outside. Lena looked toward the hallway. Her wooden box sat on the table. She opened it and removed a packet of folded papers. "I worked for the Harlan Freight and Land Company in Helena," she said. "Mr. Harlan purchased homestead claims from families who could not survive the winter. At least, that was what the records said." A fist struck the front door. Lena continued quickly. "The signatures were false. Some of the owners had never agreed to sell. Others were dead before the papers were dated. Harlan used Deputy Say and men like Boone Vickers to remove anyone who objected." The fist struck again. Elias looked at the packet. "You copied the records." "I copied enough to prove it. The original ledger disappeared after the clerk who helped me was arrested." "For what?" "Stealing company funds." "Did he?" "No." The door shook beneath another blow. Lena pressed the papers into Elias's hand. "They accused me of taking $600. They will say I am a thief. They may say worse." Elias opened the top sheet. A list of properties filled the page. Near the bottom, he saw a familiar name: Rose Mercer. His sister had owned 40 acres outside Helena, inherited from their mother. Beside her name was a transfer date. The date came 3 months after her final letter. Elias read it twice. Lena saw where he was looking. "That is why I took the copies," she said. There were too many names. Deputy Sy called from outside. "Elias Mercer, open this door under authority of the territorial court." Elias folded the papers and slipped them inside his shirt. He opened the door. Snow swirled across the porch. Sy held a document in one gloved hand. "We have a warrant for Lena Harrow. For theft and fraud. Possibly involvement in the death of a company employee." Lena stood behind Elias. Boone Vickers smiled when he saw her. "There she is." Elias remained in the doorway. "Let me read the warrant." Sy handed it over. Elias studied the seal. It was genuine, or a convincing imitation. "You can search the house," Elias said. "You will not take her today." Sy's expression hardened. "That is not your decision. The road to Red Hollow is nearly closed. She will freeze before you reach town. We brought a spare horse. She stays until morning." Vickers stepped closer. "You lied for her once already." Elias looked at him. "I do not remember speaking to you." The men searched the house. They opened cupboards, emptied drawers, and pulled blankets from the beds. Vickers overturned Lena's wooden box and watched her face as the contents scattered across the floor. They found nothing. The papers remained beneath Elias's shirt. At last, Sy returned to the porch. "We will come back at daylight." Elias met his eyes. "Bring the sheriff. I am the law here." "No, you are wearing part of it." Sy's jaw tightened, but he turned away. The riders made camp near the eastern fence. That night, Elias found Lena packing her case. "You are not leaving. They will burn your barn or take your cattle. Men like Harlan do not stop because someone closes a door. You plan to carry those papers to a judge, to a federal marshal in Fort Benton. That is more than 100 miles. I had a ticket as far as Red Hollow. Vickers saw me leave the stage when the driver stopped for repairs. I ran into the alley. Then I saw you." Elias stood beside the bed. Lena fastened the case. "I used you because I was afraid. You asked for help. I asked you to lie. You looked like someone needed to." She shook her head. "You do not understand. Every person who has helped me has paid for it." Elias looked at the chair she still wedged beneath the door each night. "Rose asked me once," he said. Lena stopped. "I told her no. I have heard that answer every day since. This is not the same." "No." He picked up her case and set it back beneath the bed. "This time I know better." Before dawn, Elias rode south through the trees. He returned 2 hours later without explaining where he had gone. At sunrise, Deputy Sy approached the porch. Elias handed Lena her coat. "You will ride with me." Her eyes searched his face. "Where?" "To Red Hollow." Sy smiled. "Finally found sense?" Elias ignored him. The journey took most of the morning. Snow slowed the horses, and the wind erased their tracks almost as soon as they made them. The 4 men rode around Elias and Lena. Vickers kept close. Each time Lena's horse slipped, Elias reached for her rein. Red Hollow appeared beneath a dark sky. People gathered as the riders entered town. News had traveled ahead of them. Faces watched from windows and doorways. Mr. Weller stood outside the mercantile with his apron still tied around his waist. Sy led them toward the jail. Lena's shoulders drew inward beneath her coat. Elias stopped his horse. Sy turned. "Keep moving. We are waiting." "For what?" A whistle sounded beyond the western ridge. The morning stage appeared on the road, followed by two mounted men wearing long brown coats. Behind them rode Elias's southern neighbor, Thomas Bell. The stage stopped before the jail. A gray-haired man stepped down. He carried a leather document case and wore the badge of a deputy United States Marshal. Say's face changed. Elias had ridden south before dawn to send Thomas Bell to the telegraph station at Mill Creek. The message had gone to Fort Benton, where a federal judge had already received several complaints against Harland Freight and Land. The marshal opened his case. "I have warrants for Harland Say and Boone Vickers." No one moved. The wind pushed snow along the street. Vickers reached toward his coat. Elias's hand settled on the rifle across his saddle. "Do not," he said. Vickers looked at the marshal, at the gathering townspeople, and finally at Lena. His hand fell away. Say removed his badge. The marshal's men took their weapons and led them into the jail they had expected to use for Lena. The other two riders surrendered without argument. Lena remained on her horse. She seemed unable to believe that no one was holding her reins. The marshal approached her. "Miss Harrow, I will need your statement and the copies you carried." Elias reached inside his coat and handed over the packet. The marshal examined the first pages. "These may be enough to bring Harland himself before a federal court." Lena looked at Elias. "You sent for him before you knew whether I was telling the truth." "I saw Rose's name. What if I wrote it there?" Elias considered her question. "You could have. And you still trusted me?" "No." The answer surprised her. Elias stepped down from his horse. "I trusted what you did when you thought no one was watching. The books you kept. The calf you would not leave. The lamp you carried to the barn." Lena's eyes filled, though she did not look away. "That was not proof. It was enough for me." The marshal took her inside the hotel to record her statement. It lasted 3 hours. Elias waited on the porch. Snow gathered on his shoulders. Mr. Weller offered him coffee, but Elias barely touched it. When Lena finally emerged, the street was empty. "They will take me to Helena," she said. "I must testify." Elias nodded. "How long?" "I do not know. The stage driver called that they would leave within the hour." Lena looked toward the wagon yard. "I should collect my case. It is at the ranch. I can ask someone to bring it. You can collect it yourself when you return." She looked at him. "You believe I will return?" Elias rubbed his thumb across the worn edge of his glove. The seam Lena had repaired still held. "At the depot, you asked me to pretend I knew you." She waited. "I am tired of pretending." The wind moved between them. Lena lowered her eyes. "I was going to leave last night. I know. I thought staying would ruin what you had. This ranch has survived drought, blizzards, and bad cattle prices." His voice softened. "It can survive 2 people living in it." Lena pressed her lips together. "I do not know how long the trial will take. Then I will keep the fire going." She reached for his hand. It was the smallest gesture she had ever made, and the bravest. Elias closed his fingers around hers. Lena left for Helena that afternoon. The winter continued without her. Elias rose before daylight. He fed the cattle, repaired fences, and returned each evening to a house that felt larger than it had before. He kept 2 cups beside the stove. Letters came every few weeks. Lena wrote that Harland had been arrested. She wrote that the false deeds filled 3 cabinets in the federal office. She wrote that families from across the territory were coming forward to reclaim their land. She did not write about returning. Elias did not ask. Instead, he told her about the ranch. The calf born during the storm had grown strong. The barn cat had produced 4 kittens beneath the hayloft. The feed merchant had refunded the double payment after receiving a letter written in Lena's careful hand. By March, the snow began to soften. Water dripped from the roof. Dark earth appeared along the southern hills. One evening, Elias saw a wagon approaching from the east. He stood on the porch as it crossed the final mile. Lena sat beside the driver. Her traveling coat had been repaired. The wooden case rested at her feet. When the wagon stopped, she climbed down before the driver could offer his hand. Elias remained beside the steps. Lena looked past him toward the house. I did not know whether the room would still be available. Elias took her case. The latch still works. She smiled. This time there was no fear behind it. Together they walked inside. The blue shawl hung near the door. Beneath it, Elias had added a second wooden peg. Lena removed her coat and placed it there. On the table waited 2 bowls of stew, 2 cups, and the red scarf she had made him. The fire burned steadily in the stove. Outside, the last cold wind of winter crossed the valley and struck the walls. Inside, Elias closed the door against it. He did not lock it. He no longer lived alone.